Jeffrey Dahmer's story begins like a shadow that slowly crept into the heart of America. To the world, he seemed like an awkward boy, quiet and strange, someone who could easily blend into the background. But behind those cold eyes was a darkness that would one day shock the entire nation. Born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in 1960, Dahmer's childhood looked ordinary from the outside. Yet inside the home, cracks were already forming. His parents' constant fights filled the house with tension, and young Jeffrey often found himself alone, disconnected, and isolated. While most kids spent their days playing outside, Jeffrey developed a disturbing fascination. Dead animals fascinated him, not with fear, but with curiosity. He collected their bones, dissected their bodies, and wondered what made them work. It was a hobby that alarmed his father, but no one could see it as a warning sign of the horrors that would come. As the years went by, this obsession only grew darker. By his teenage years, Jeffrey wasn't just curious about death. He was beginning to feel a strange connection between control, desire, and life itself. High school did little to change him. He was a loner, often drinking heavily, even during the day. His classmates saw him as a weird but harmless kid who sometimes pulled strange pranks just to get attention. But inside, Jeffrey was fighting urges he didn't understand. By the time he graduated in 1978, his fantasies had become overwhelming. That summer, just weeks after finishing school, Dahmer acted on them for the very first time. One night, driving alone, he picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. At first, it seemed like a harmless encounter, two young men hanging out, drinking, and talking. But when Stephen said he wanted to leave, Jeffrey panicked. He didn't want him to go. The fear of abandonment mixed with his dark desires. And suddenly, Jeffrey struck Stephen with a dumbbell, killing him. In that moment, the quiet boy who had always lived in the shadows crossed a line he could never return from. He dismembered the body, crushed the bones, and scattered the remains near his home. No one suspected anything. To the world, Jeffrey Dahmer was still just another teenager. But inside, something had been unleashed. For nearly a decade after that first murder, Dahmer lived in silence, hiding his urges while trying to live a normal life. He enrolled in college, but quickly dropped out. He joined the army, but was discharged for heavy drinking. He moved in with relatives, drifted between jobs, and continued sinking into alcoholism. But no matter how hard he tried to appear normal, the darkness inside him never went away. It only waited patiently until it demanded to be fed again. By the mid-1980s, Jeffrey had returned to Milwaukee. He lived alone in small apartments, working odd jobs. It was here that his fantasies started taking over completely. He began luring men from bars and clubs, drugging them, and in some cases assaulting them. At first, he let them go, but with each encounter, his hunger for control grew stronger. He wanted more than just company. He wanted total possession. In 1987, Dahmer's secret life turned deadly once again. At a hotel in Milwaukee, he murdered 25-year-old Stephen Twomey. Jeffrey later admitted he had no clear memory of the killing, only waking up to find Stephen dead beside him. Panic set in, but instead of stopping, Dahmer embraced the darkness. He purchased a suitcase, stuffed the body inside, and transported it back to his grandmother's basement. There, he dismembered the body and disposed of it piece by piece. This time, it wasn't just about killing. It was about control, power, and an obsession that was spiraling out of control. From that point forward, Dahmer's killings became more frequent. His quiet and awkward demeanor allowed him to blend into society, making him appear harmless. But behind closed doors, he was building a secret world of unimaginable horror, a world where human lives were nothing more than objects of his twisted desires. Milwaukee had no idea that in its midst lived a man who was slowly becoming one of the most terrifying serial killers in American history. Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes were not only horrifying, but also carried out in ways that seemed almost unbelievable. By the early 1980s, after serving time in prison for sexual assault, Dahmer returned to his old habits with even darker intentions. He was no longer just interested in temporary control. He wanted permanent possession over his victims. Dahmer's apartment in Milwaukee soon became a chamber of horror. Neighbors would later recall strange smells, odd noises, and the constant hum of a saw. He lured young men, often promising them money in exchange for photographs or companionship. Once inside, his victims rarely left alive. Jeffrey developed a pattern. He would drug his victims, strangle them, and then carry out acts of necrophilia and dismemberment. But what made him stand apart from most killers was his obsession with keeping a part of them, bones, skulls, and even organs. His refrigerator became a collection site, holding pieces of the lives he had taken. Dahmer's obsession only grew deeper. He admitted later that he wanted to create something he called an altar, made of human remains, where he could sit and feel power over life and death. To him, it was the ultimate control, a twisted attempt to fill his emptiness with something permanent. Despite his escalating crimes, Dahmer managed to avoid detection for years. In one chilling incident, a teenage boy escaped from his apartment, drugged and terrified, but police dismissed the situation as a domestic dispute and returned the boy to Dahmer. That boy was later murdered. This mistake would become one of the most infamous failures in police history. Dahmer lived a double life. To his family, he was quiet and withdrawn. To his neighbors, he was odd but harmless. But behind closed doors, he was building one of the most disturbing legacies in American crime history. The more he killed, the less careful he became. His compulsion was spiraling out of control, and the walls of his secret world were beginning to crack. The nightmare that had been hidden for so long was inching closer to the light. They say monsters don't live under the bed. They live next door, and in Milwaukee, that monster had a name: Jeffrey Dahmer. By 1991, his secret life of horror had spiraled so far out of control that not even his charm or quiet demeanor could keep the darkness hidden anymore. His apartment, a small and ordinary unit on North 25th Street, had become a slaughterhouse disguised as a home. Inside those walls, Dahmer had lured men with promises of money, alcohol, and companionship. But what awaited them was unthinkable drugged drinks, chains, knives, and a camera lens that froze their final moments. For years, the missing persons cases piled up, but somehow Dahmer slipped through the cracks. Until one night, when fate finally turned against him. It was July 22, 1991. A man named Tracy Edwards had been approached by Dahmer at a bar. Like many before him, Tracy was offered money to come back to Dahmer's apartment. Reluctantly, he agreed, but when he stepped inside, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The foul stench of decay hung in the air. Photographs of men in compromising positions were scattered around, and Dahmer's eyes carried a cold hunger that felt inhuman. Within minutes, Dahmer pulled out handcuffs and snapped one onto Tracy's wrist. That's when panic set in. Tracy knew he had to survive. He played along, pretending to stay calm, pretending to trust Dahmer. For hours he talked, buying time, until finally, when Dahmer was distracted, Tracy saw his chance. He bolted out the door, handcuffs still dangling, and ran through the streets until he found two police officers. Out of breath, terrified, Tracy told them the truth. There was a killer inside that apartment. The officers followed him back to Dahmer's home. What they saw inside would scar them forever. In the bedroom drawer, they found photographs, dozens of them, showing mutilated bodies in every stage of dismemberment. The images were so graphic, so horrifying, that the officers froze. At first, they thought they might be staged, but the details were too real, too gruesome. When they turned to confront Dahmer, the killer tried to fight back, but it was too late. The police overpowered him, handcuffed him, and began searching the apartment. What they uncovered was something out of a nightmare. In the refrigerator, they found human heads carefully wrapped in plastic. In the freezer, there were bags of flesh. A pot on the stove contained human remains and acid. Jars filled with preserved organs lined the shelves. The apartment was not just a crime scene, it was a house of horrors. Later, investigators would count 11 skulls, 3 torsos, and countless bones. The smell, the images, the sheer magnitude of the crimes shocked even the most hardened detectives. And as word spread, Milwaukee and soon the entire world would learn the name. Jeffrey Dahmer. The trial that followed in 1992 became one of the most infamous in American history. Dahmer faced charges for 17 murders. In court, he appeared calm, almost detached, as if discussing someone else's life. The prosecution laid out the horrifying details, the lures, the killings, the cannibalism, the attempts to create zombies by drilling into skulls and pouring acid in wounds. The jury was visibly shaken, and the world watched in disbelief. But Dahmer didn't deny it. In fact, he confessed. He explained, almost coldly, that his crimes were driven by an uncontrollable urge, a compulsion he could never escape. He admitted he wanted complete control over his victims, that he couldn't bear the thought of them leaving. To him, killing was the only way to make them stay, but the defense argued that Dahmer was insane. They claimed no sane man could commit such acts. The prosecution, however, insisted that Dahmer knew exactly what he was doing, that he was calculated, methodical, and fully aware that his actions were wrong. In the end, the jury agreed. Dahmer was declared legally sane and sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison, totaling nearly 1,000 years. For the families of his victims, there was no real justice, no sentence that could undo the horror. But at least, they thought, he would never walk free again. Behind bars, Dahmer was a curiosity. Some inmates feared him, others hated him, and a few were strangely drawn to him. Dahmer himself claimed he had found religion, telling others he had been baptized and forgiven. But forgiveness was something his victims' families would never give. And in prison, monsters are not safe. In 1994, just 2 years into his sentence, Dahmer was attacked. On November 28th, while cleaning the prison bathrooms, he and 2 other inmates were left unsupervised. One of them, Christopher Scarver, snapped. Armed with a metal bar, Scarver beat Dahmer to death. When guards found his body, the man who had once terrorized Milwaukee lay lifeless on a blood-stained floor. Just like that, the reign of Jeffrey Dahmer was over. But even in death, Dahmer's legacy remained. His crimes left scars not just on the victims' families, but on an entire city. People began asking hard questions. How did the police miss the warning signs? How did neighbors report strange smells and screams, only to be ignored? How did Dahmer manage to get away with murder for more than a decade? For many, the answers were as chilling as the crimes themselves. Systemic failures, racism, homophobia, and indifference had allowed a predator to keep hunting in plain sight. Today, Jeffrey Dahmer is remembered not just as the Milwaukee Cannibal, but as a symbol of horror that lurks behind ordinary doors. He looked normal, he acted polite, but inside, he carried a darkness few could ever imagine. His story reminds us of a truth we wish we could forget, that monsters are not myths. They are real. They walk among us, and sometimes they live right next door. In the end, Jeffrey Dahmer's name became a chilling reminder of what happens when evil hides in plain sight. His crimes left scars not only on the families of his victims, but on an entire nation, struggling to comprehend such darkness. Though Dahmer is gone, the horror of his actions continues to echo a warning that monsters do not always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes they live right next door,